A millionaire abandoned his pregnant wife because she wasn't educated enough. Years later, she returns as the president of the country, and he begs for a second chance. What she does next leaves everyone in absolute shock. Before you watch, subscribe to the channel, and comment on where you're from so we can bring you even more videos. Have you ever felt the world crumble under your feet? That moment when everything you believe to be solid turns out to be as fragile as sandcastles before the tide? For Helena, that moment came on a rainy autumn afternoon when the city sky seemed to cry for her, anticipating the tears that would soon mark her face. The raindrops ran down the window of the mansion, while Helena, 6 months pregnant, held with trembling hands the letter that would forever change the course of her life. The thin paper, imported like everything in that house, now weighed tons in her fingers. The words of her husband, heir to the country's largest luxury jewelry empire, cut deeper than any diamond could scratch. You are nothing more than a saleswoman. I had the misfortune of making my wife. With no education, no refinement, no intellectual capacity to represent my family's name, your rough hands, which have never held a university book, shame me in front of my clients. With the twins on the way, I can no longer sustain this charade. The driver will take you and your belongings wherever you wish, but don't come back. The sound of the rain intensified, as if the universe wanted to drown out the sob that escaped her lips. Helena caressed her prominent belly, thinking of the 2 little beings growing inside her, oblivious to the hurricane that had just devastated her world. "What will I do with you, my little ones?" she whispered, feeling the gentle movement of a life that responded to her touch, unaware of the rejection she had just suffered. At that moment, you might wonder what leads a man to abandon not only a wife, but his own unborn children. The answer is as old as humanity itself. Some hearts are incapable of seeing beyond appearances, of valuing what doesn't shine like gold at first glance. Helena had been a saleswoman in one of his family's jewelry stores. Her hands, which he now described as rough, were silent witnesses to years of honest work, started in her teens to help her sick mother. It was there, among crystals and precious metals, that the heir met her and was enchanted. Not by her intellect or character, she now realized, but by the novelty she represented, so different from the women in his social circle. With a single small suitcase, as she refused to take what she had not earned with her own effort, Helena went down the marble stairs for the last time. The maternity dress she wore, a gift from him, now soaked by the rain that greeted her as she left, symbolized everything she believed she had achieved, and that was now draining away like drops on the sidewalk. The driver, who had so often treated her with reverence, could barely look at her, not out of cruelty, but out of shame. The shame we feel in the face of suffering we cannot, or do not know how to, alleviate. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked in a low voice. Helena realized she had no answer to that seemingly simple question. Where does a woman go when she's 6 months pregnant with twins, with no college education, no savings of her own, abandoned by the husband who promised to protect her through thick and thin? The options were as scarce as clouds on a stormy day. "To the bus station," she finally answered, remembering her aunt, a retired teacher who lived in a neighboring town. The only family she had left after her mother had passed away too soon, a victim of the same heart condition that Helena, though she didn't know it yet, also carried in her veins. Sitting in the back of the luxury car, Helena watched the city pass by the window. The city had never seemed so gray and hostile to her. The same streets that once enchanted her with their elegant stores and sophisticated restaurants now seemed like sets from a movie from which she had been brutally expelled. Have you ever noticed how places change according to our state of mind? How the same landscape can seem welcoming or threatening, depending on how we feel. For Helena, each imposing building she passed was now a reminder of a world to which she had never truly belonged. At the bus station, the driver left her without saying goodbye. Helena counted the little money she had in her purse. Minimal savings she had kept out of habit, even when her husband insisted that she no longer needed to worry about money. Cruel irony. Those few bills that once seemed superfluous now represented her entire fortune. It was not enough for a full ticket to her aunt's city, just enough to get to the neighboring town, from where she would have to find another means of transportation. Helena's tears mixed with the rain as she waited for the bus, feeling curious and some pitying looks on her solitary figure. A visibly pregnant woman, with a single suitcase, crying on a bus station bench. When she finally arrived in the small town, the rain had momentarily stopped. The sky, however, remained heavy, as if reflecting the emotional storm that was raging inside her. With her last money, she paid for a taxi to her aunt's modest house, a retired teacher who had dedicated her life to teaching other people's children, without ever having her own. The hug from Donna Cecilia, her aunt, was the first genuine human warmth Helena had felt in months. No accusatory questions, no silent judgments, just the unconditional welcome that only those who know another's pain know how to offer. "My daughter," the gray-haired woman with kind eyes said, "you are home now." That simple phrase, said with such sincerity, triggered a deep and liberating cry in Helena. It was as if for the first time she could let out all the pain of rejection, all the fear of the uncertain future, all the shame of having believed in a fairy tale that had turned out to be a cruel farce. That night, feeling sharp pains, and with her blood pressure soaring, Helena was rushed to the public hospital of the small town. The contrast with the private clinics in the city, where she had had her prenatal care until then, could not have been greater. Peeling walls, old equipment, crowded waiting rooms. But paradoxically, it was there that Helena found more humanity than in all her previous consultations. "Your babies are at risk, ma'am," the doctor warned with a compassionate look upon discovering her situation. "You need absolute bed rest, or we could lose all three of you." The news came as a second blow. Helena, who until then had focused her thoughts on abandonment, now faced an even more terrifying reality. The possibility of losing her children, the only people in the world who were still completely hers. For weeks, Helena remained in bed in her aunt's simple room, where the peeling wallpaper contrasted violently with the silk panels of the mansion she had left. Each kick of the babies in her belly was a painful reminder of the uncertain future that awaited them, but also a sign of hope. They were fighting to live, and she needed to fight with them. During this period of forced rest, something unexpected began to happen. Her aunt, an educator by nature, brought her books. At first, they were light romances to distract her mind. Then, inspirational biographies of people who overcame adversity. Finally, books on management, economics, and business. "He can take everything from you, except what you learn," the old lady would repeat, her tired eyes reflecting decades dedicated to education. "Knowledge is power, my dear." The municipal library became her source of escape. The librarian, her aunt's longtime friend, would set aside volumes she thought were interesting and send them to her through a neighborhood boy who loved the mission of bringing books to the girl with the twin babies. Helena devoured the books like someone finding water in the desert. The yellowed pages and the characteristic smell of old paper became her most faithful companions during those days of physical loneliness and intellectual discovery. With each page turned, she felt a little less like the saleswoman with no intellectual capacity, described by her ex-husband, and a little more like a woman capable of building her own path. Have you ever experienced how reading can transform not only our minds, but our perception of ourselves? How every new piece of knowledge we acquire makes us feel more capable, more complete. Helena was discovering this transformative power of education in the most unexpected way, forced by adversity to find strength where she never imagined looking. The months passed slowly. Her pregnancy, once a period of pampering and material comfort, became a daily battle against medical complications and financial limitations. Her prenatal appointments, now at the local health center, were moments of anxiety, but also of small victories, with each strong heartbeat detected in the little beings she carried. The birth arrived earlier than expected, on a particularly cold winter morning. Without a partner's hand to hold, Helena gripped her aunt's wrinkled fingers tightly as she brought her daughters into the world. The process was lonely and painful, without the luxurious maternity suite she had once dreamed of, without the expensive flowers her husband would surely send, without the social celebration that accompanies the birth of important heirs. But when the little one's cries finally echoed through the simple delivery room of the public hospital, something changed definitively within Helena. Holding the two girls for the first time, so small, so fragile, but so perfectly hers, she made a silent oath that would change the course not only of her life, but of the story that was about to begin. You will never know what it feels like to be inferior to anyone. In that moment, looking at the reddened faces of her newborn daughters, Helena understood that the abandonment she had suffered was not the end of her story, but only the painful first chapter of a much larger journey. A journey that would require more courage, determination, and intelligence than she had ever imagined possessing. The hospital's recovery room, with its peeling walls and mended sheets, became the unlikely setting for her rebirth. There, among cotton diapers and simple bottles, was born not only Mother Helena, but also the seed of the woman who would one day transform her pain into purpose, her humiliation into strength, her abandonment into autonomy. Chapter 3. The Ascent. The first few nights with the twins were of intense learning and extreme exhaustion. Without nannies or private nurses, Helena was divided between two newborns who seemed to coordinate their crying schedules to ensure their mother didn't get a single moment of rest. Her aunt helped as she could, but the years weighed on her shoulders, and it soon became clear that Helena would have to find strength where she didn't know it existed. It was during one of those endless early mornings, breastfeeding one of the babies while the other was finally sleeping, that Helena made her first concrete decision about the future. Looking out the simple window of the room she now shared with her daughters, she saw the first lights of dawn painting the sky with soft colors, promising a new day. Tomorrow, she thought, gently rocking the little one in her arms, I will start building our way back, not to the mansion, not to his family's name, but to a place where we can be proud of who we are. And so, while the city was still sleeping, Helena began to weave the first threads of what would become her safety net, and later, her ladder to success. With the twins asleep for a brief moment of synchronized peace, she opened the notebook her aunt had given her and wrote her first business plan. Simple, rudimentary, but deeply significant. Handmade jewelry by Helena, she wrote in a trembling hand, but firm with purpose. The irony was not lost on her, using the very sector that had rejected her as a springboard for her independence. But there was something poetic in that choice, something that spoke of redemption, of transformation, of social alchemy. That early morning marked the true beginning of the journey that would transform the unrefined saleswoman into one of the country's most influential women. A journey that would prove that true value is not in the external shine of jewels, but in the inner strength of those who create them with purpose. And you? What is your purpose? What would you do if everything you built was suddenly ripped from your hands? Where would you find the strength to start over, not just for yourself, but for others who completely depend on your love and determination? While you reflect on these questions, remember Helena, not the first lady she would one day be, not the successful businesswoman or the visionary political leader, but the abandoned young mother who found, in the darkest hours of the early morning, the courage to believe that dawn always comes, even after the longest night. The first few years were of extreme hardship. The simple room she shared with the twins in her aunt's house had become the epicenter of a new world, a miniature universe where three hearts beat together, facing each new day with the silent courage of those who have no alternative but to move forward. The nights were long. While the little one slept, Helena worked. Her fingers, which had once displayed perfectly manicured nails, now had small cuts and calluses. The contrast between the millionaire jewelry she had once worn and the bead necklaces she now produced was a constant wound that she turned into fuel. Have you ever noticed how a person's hands tell their story? Helena's narrated a tale of a fall and a rise, of fragility transformed into strength. Under the dim light of a patched-up lamp, while the silence of the early morning was broken only by the soft breathing of her daughters, she created small pieces of craftsmanship that she sold at local fairs. "Aren't they real jewelry?" an occasional customer would say, disdainfully examining a pair of earrings made with dyed seeds. "It depends on what you consider real," Helena would reply with a serene smile. "These seeds grew under the same sun that makes diamonds shine." That kind of response began to attract a loyal clientele. Women who bought her pieces not just for their rustic beauty, but for the meaning Helena infused into each creation. The twins grew quickly. Laura and Beatrice, names chosen to mean victorious and one who brings happiness, celebrated their first birthday at a small party in her Aunt Cecilia's backyard. There were no expensive gifts or sophisticated decor, just a simple cake, some colorful balloons, and the overflowing love of two women. It was at this simple party that Helena met Mariana, a local school teacher who had come with Donna Cecilia. Observing the crafts on display, Mariana asked the question that would change the course of her trajectory. "Have you ever thought of teaching these techniques at the neighborhood's cultural workshop? We pay by the hour. It's not much, but it would be extra income." The proposal came like a wave of possibilities. Teach? She, who had so often been told she didn't have enough knowledge? The initial insecurity was quickly overcome by a practical need. Any additional source of income would be welcome. "I don't know if I have the ability to teach," Helena confessed, rocking Beatrice. "Anyone who can create pieces like these while raising two daughters alone has more ability than you think," Mariana replied, with that unshakable conviction of educators who see potential where others see only limitations. The first class was a test of courage. In front of 15 women, Helena trembled inside. Her hands, skilled at creating, seemed clumsy when trying to demonstrate. Her voice, firm when singing lullabies to her daughters, came out hesitant when explaining techniques she mastered intuitively. But something happened during those initial 2 hours, as she shared not only techniques, but the stories behind each piece. Helena discovered a new facet of herself, the ability to connect, to inspire, to transform her personal experience into something that could benefit other people. "When I started, I only had half a pack of beads and a dull pair of scissors," she told the students. "What makes a piece special is not the value of the material, but the intention we put into it. At the end of that first class, 3 women waited to talk to her in private. They all had different stories of abandonment. In each of them, Helena recognized a piece of her own pain, now transformed into healing potential. "We are like these rough stones," said the oldest lady, who was silently crying as she held an unfinished pendant. Not always beautiful at first glance, but full of possibilities. The workshop, which was supposed to be bi-weekly, became weekly due to growing demand. Soon, Helena was not only teaching crafts, but, without realizing it, leading a support group for women in personal reconstruction. Her students brought materials they found, fallen seeds in the park, broken pieces of ceramic, old buttons, and learned to transform discards into art, abandonment into beauty. The nights of study continued. After putting the twins to bed, Helena would pore over books she had now borrowed from the local university library, thanks to Mariana's intervention. The study nights were watered down with coffee and lit by weak lamps that made her eyes burn. "You should think about going to college, ma'am," the librarian suggested. "There are scholarships for single mothers with good grades." College! The word echoed in her mind like a distant dream. In the mansion she had left behind, her ex-husband used to make acid comments about her lack of formal education. The idea of proving her intellectual capacity, not for him, but for herself and her daughters, began to germinate. The application forms for the university entrance exam were filled out by hand over several early mornings. Each question seemed like an obstacle. Each field revealed a gap in her history. "Last educational institution attended?" the document asked. Her evening high school, completed with difficulty, seemed insufficient given the competition she would face. The preparation was intense. While the twins were at the community daycare, Helena divided her time between crafts, classes at the cultural workshop, and studying for the entrance exam. Every minute was precious. Every break a luxury she rarely allowed herself. The night of the exam arrived. With a kiss on her daughters' foreheads, Helena went to the university. The illuminated campus, with its imposing buildings and well-kept gardens, seemed to belong to another world, a universe of opportunities from which she had been excluded for so long. "You have 3 hours to complete the exam," the proctor announced. Looking at those pages that would determine her future, Helena felt the weight of her entire journey. She wasn't just there for herself, but for her daughters, for her aunt, for the women in the workshop. She took a deep breath and began to answer, converting every doubt into determination, every insecurity into focus. The results came on a Saturday morning. Helena was at the local fair when Mariana appeared with an envelope in her hand and a smile she couldn't contain. "Open it," she said, extending the official paper. With trembling fingers, Helena tore open the envelope. The words danced before her eyes, blurred with tears. Approved. Business administration. Full scholarship for a single mother in a vulnerable social situation. The hug she gave Mariana was filled with a gratitude no words could express. There, among handcrafted necklaces and seed bracelets, a new phase of her life was beginning. No longer as the saleswoman who had the misfortune of becoming a wife, but as the university student who had the strength to reinvent herself. The college years were challenging. Sometimes, Helena would arrive at class after all-night vigils with one of the girls sick. Her notebooks, always impeccably organized, occasionally displayed colorful drawings in the margins, little artistic interventions by Laura and Beatrice during the rare moments when sleep overtook them during their mother's study sessions. "How do you do it?" her classmates would ask, amazed at her ability to maintain exemplary grades despite her responsibilities. One day at a time, one problem at a time, one solution at a time, Helena would reply with simplicity. It was during a project for a social entrepreneurship class that the idea came to her. The professor had proposed that students identify communities with untapped productive potential. Helena immediately thought of the women in her workshop, many of them with impressive artisanal skills, but without access to markets that valued their work. Handmade jewelry produced by traditional communities, using ancestral techniques and sustainable materials, she wrote in her project, feeling every word resonate with a greater purpose. The work took on a life of its own. What was supposed to be just a theoretical proposal turned into a detailed business plan. Helena spent weeks in interviewing artisans, researching alternative materials, and studying ethical marketing strategies. "This isn't just a capstone project," the professor commented, impressed. "It's a viable project that can transform lives." The words lit a fire. What if it wasn't just an academic exercise? The idea was as audacious as it was frightening. To use the very sector that had rejected her to create opportunities for other women in vulnerable situations. It was on one of those nights of reflection that the twins, now 5 years old, asked the question Helena had dreaded. "Mommy, why don't we have a daddy like the other kids?" The question, as innocent as it was devastating, caught Helena off guard. With a lump in her throat, she sat between them on the small bed they shared. Some families have a mommy and a daddy. Others have 2 mommies. Some have 2 daddies. And some, like ours, just have 1 mommy who loves for 2. "But where is our daddy?" Beatrice insisted. Helena swallowed hard and said, "He chose to shine alone." The answer seemed to temporarily satisfy the children's curiosity. But for Helena, that conversation reopened old wounds. In her simple dresser, she kept the only piece of jewelry she hadn't returned, a small sapphire brooch he had given her, saying it matched her ignorance of the world. That night, Helena contemplated the brooch. The deep blue stone, which had once made her feel diminished, now seemed to hold a new meaning. It was no longer a symbol of her supposed ignorance, but a silent testament to how much she had learned and grown. What do you think of Helena's decision to use her pain to help others? What does her journey tell us about the meaning of success? Chapter 4. The Alchemist of Joy. The turning point came when, having graduated with honors in business administration, Helena developed a revolutionary project. Handmade jewelry produced by traditional communities, using ancestral techniques and sustainable materials. The project not only won the National Innovation Award, but it also caught the eye of an important visiting professor, Dr. Isabel Sanchez, a renowned anthropologist. Dr. Isabel saw in her brilliant ex-student more than a talented administrator. She saw a natural-born leader with scars that told stories of resilience. "You turn rough stones into jewels, but more importantly, you turn pain into purpose," the mentor said, inviting her to lead a government training program for extractive communities. The irony was not lost on Helena. The very sector that had rejected her was now opening up to welcome her, not as a trophy wife, but as a brilliant mind capable of revolutionizing a traditionally elitist market. Accepting that invitation meant leaving the relative security she had won. It meant moving to the capital with the girls, now 6 years old, leaving the comfort of her Aunt Cecilia's house, and immersing herself in a universe of public policy and high responsibility. "I'm scared," she confessed to her aunt as they packed for the move. "What if I'm not capable? What if I'm exposing myself too much? What if you transform the lives of hundreds of women just like you?" Her aunt interrupted. "Fear is only useful when it makes us more careful, not when it paralyzes us. Go, my daughter. Show the world that some people need to be broken to discover the strength that lies within them." On the eve of their departure, Helena received news that left her stunned. An exclusive report revealed the dubious origin of the precious stones sold by her ex-husband's empire, with accusations of involvement in illegal extraction. The photos showed the once powerful jeweler, now with deep circles under his eyes, leaving the federal police headquarters after giving his testimony. His jewelry stores, once synonymous with luxury, were closing one by one. Helena looked at that photo for a long time, feeling a strange absence of satisfaction. What she felt was a confirmation of what she had always suspected. The true value was not in the precious stones, but in the integrity with which we lead our lives. "Mommy, why are you looking at that man in the magazine?" Laura asked, peering over her shoulder. "I'm learning an important lesson, my love," Helena replied, closing the magazine and hugging her daughter. "That not all that glitters is gold, and that a person's true value is not in what they own, but in what they build." The next morning, with the twins excited about the adventure of an airplane trip, their first in their lives, Helena took one last look at the simple house that had been her refuge. That place had never had the luxury of the mansion she had once called home, but it had something infinitely more valuable: the dignity of someone who rebuilds their life with their own hands, brick by brick, dream by dream. "Are we ready, Mommy?" the girls asked in unison, holding their small backpacks. "Yes, my loves," Helena replied with a profound conviction. "We are ready to build our next chapter." Have you ever stopped to think about the various layers of meaning behind the words value and precious? About how our understanding of these words changes as we mature and face challenges? About how the true jewels of our lives are rarely those that can be put in a safe? Helena was only just beginning to understand the true meaning of these concepts, and her journey, marked by painful falls and inspiring ascents, still held twists that even the most skilled precious stone cutter couldn't have predicted. The capital city received Helena and her daughters with the characteristic indifference of big metropolises. The functional apartment assigned to her as the new coordinator of the government project was modest but comfortable, 3 times larger than the room they had shared at her Aunt Cecilia's house. Still, it was infinitely smaller than the mansion where the twins had been conceived. "It's too big, Mommy," Beatrice exclaimed, running from one room to another with childlike energy. Laura, more reserved, carefully explored every detail, as if mentally cataloging this new chapter of their lives. Her first day at the office was challenging. The Sustainable Gems project existed only on paper, an ambitious proposal to connect traditional, semi-precious stone extractive communities to ethical markets, ensuring fair income and environmental preservation. "Half of the communities don't even have legal documentation to operate," her assistant explained. "The men work in precarious conditions, while the women polish the stones without proper equipment and are exposed to dangerous chemicals." The scenario was discouraging, but for Helena, each obstacle had a familiar face, that of the women in her workshop, of single mothers seeking dignity, of her own story. Her first decision surprised the team. Instead of starting the work with traditional technical reports, Helena embarked on a series of visits to the extractive communities. "You don't build trust through video conferencing," she explained to the director, who questioned the need for so much travel. "We need to listen before we speak, to understand before we propose." For 3 months, Helena immersed herself in the reality of the communities. In each village, she sat in conversation circles with the local women, offering attentive ears to stories that rarely found space in the air-conditioned offices of the capital. The twins, who accompanied her on trips during school holidays, became cherished mascots, building bridges of trust that no official document could have established. "Your hands know how to make magic," an elderly artisan commented, watching Helena help polish an amethyst. "Where does that knowledge come from?" "From necessity," she replied simply. "Life teaches us precisely what we need to learn to survive it." It was in these unpretentious conversations that the project's true innovation was born. Instead of just formalizing the extraction and improving working conditions, Helena envisioned something bigger, a complete revolution in the production chain, where communities would not only be suppliers of raw materials, but creators of value. Why do we send our most beautiful stones to be cut and turned into jewelry in other countries when we have the most skilled hands in the world right here? She questioned in a decisive ministerial meeting. The question caused unease. The obvious answer, because that's the way it's always been, revealed the conservatism of a sector resistant to change. But Helena was not willing to accept inertia as a justification for perpetuating inequality. Have you ever noticed how some systems seem specifically designed to keep certain groups at a disadvantage? How seemingly neutral structures hide sophisticated mechanisms of exclusion? Helena, who had experienced rejection based on her origins firsthand, saw these patterns clearly and was determined to break them. The plan she presented was audacious: to transform traditional communities not just into ethical suppliers of stones, but into centers for the production of artisanal jewelry with added value. This meant investing in training, adequate tools, origin certification, and, most importantly, a brand that valued the story behind each piece. Luxury with purpose, she defined, presenting a paradoxical concept to many. We want each piece of jewelry to tell a story, not just of aesthetic beauty, but of social transformation. The resistance was immediate. Representatives of the traditional industry argued about quality standards and technical limitations of the communities. Helena listened to each objection, acknowledged legitimate concerns, but remained firm in her vision. If the luxury industry can teach centuries-old techniques to new apprentices in Paris and Milan, why can't we do the same in Brazilian communities? She countered. The first Cutting and Design Center was inaugurated 6 months after Helena's arrival in the capital. Located in a riverside community, the modest space had basic but essential equipment and a solar energy system. The choice of location was no coincidence. It was precisely the region from which the stones that supplied her ex-husband's jewelry stores came from. The first students were women between 16 and 67 years old, wives, daughters, and mothers of minors. Some had never finished elementary school. Others had never left their communities. All, however, carried in their calloused fingers the ancestral skill of those who have always had to create beauty from the little they had. "We're not teaching you to make jewelry," Helena explained on the first day. "We're giving you tools to turn what you already know how to create into art." The teaching method deeply respected traditional knowledge. Renowned designers were invited not as superior teachers, but as partners who brought complementary techniques. The result of this encounter between the traditional and the contemporary were unique pieces that began to attract the attention of buyers who valued not only beauty, but the history and impact of their purchases. In a year, the project that many considered utopian showed concrete results. The average income of the participating families had doubled. Young people who once planned to leave their communities now saw a future in their origins. School dropout rates among girls fell drastically, as jewelry making offered an economic alternative that did not require dropping out of school. "You turn stones into purpose," Dr. Isabel commented during a visit. "That's social alchemy in its deepest sense." The term social alchemy perfectly captured what Helena was accomplishing. Just as ancient alchemists dreamed of turning common metals into gold, she was transforming marginalized communities into centers of excellence, prejudices into opportunities, victims into protagonists. The success of the project attracted international attention. A European fashion magazine published a feature on the jewelry of a deep Brazil, highlighting the transformative impact of the process. The report featured Helena as the social alchemist who turns misery into art, a definition that left her simultaneously proud and uncomfortable. "I'm not the one who transforms anything," she insisted in interviews. "I just created conditions for these women to transform their own realities." This attitude of redirecting the spotlight to the true protagonists was a fundamental part of the project's authenticity. In a world where social impact often just became a marketing strategy, Helena's approach set a new paradigm for truly ethical business. Meanwhile, at home, the twins were growing up, adapted to the new reality. The public school they attended offered educational opportunities that Helena could never have provided alone. Laura developed a passion for science, while Beatrice showed a talent for arts, complementary skills that made them an unbeatable pair. On Sundays, their only exclusive day for her daughters, they explored the capital together, not just its monuments, but mainly its free cultural spaces and popular fairs. When asked about their father, the girls would naturally repeat, "He chose to shine alone." The explanation seemed sufficient for the children, but Helena knew that the time for deeper questions would inevitably come. She prepared for that moment by building honest answers that didn't fuel resentment, but also didn't romanticize abandonment. This preparation was interrupted abruptly on an ordinary afternoon when Helena received an unexpected call at her office. "Madam Secretary, there's a man at reception insisting on seeing you. He says he's the father of your daughters," her assistant informed her, with obvious discomfort in her voice. Time seemed to freeze. After the exchange of brief messages years ago, when he was in the hospital, there had been no further contact. Helena had assumed that paternal absence would continue to be the twins' reality. "Did he mention the girls' names?" she asked, seeking to confirm it wasn't a mistake. "Yes, ma'am. Laura and Beatrice." Helena took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline of surprise give way to a strangely lucid calm. For years, she had imagined this moment, the reappearance of the man who had abandoned her while she was pregnant. She had mentally rehearsed various reactions. Now, confronted with reality, she realized that no amount of rehearsal could adequately prepare her. "Ask him to wait. I'll be there in 10 minutes, she replied, needing that time to organize her thoughts. The walk from her office to reception had never seemed so long. Each step was accompanied by reflections on how she had gotten there, not just physically, but existentially. The young, rejected saleswoman was now a Secretary of State, whose signature authorized multi-million-dollar programs. As she turned the last corner, she saw him through the glass doors. The years had not been kind to him. The elegant and arrogant man she had known was visibly older than his real age, with prematurely gray hair and a slightly hunched posture. "Ricardo," Helena called as she approached, deliberately using his first name. He turned toward the voice, and the recognition in his eyes was followed by a complex expression, a mix of surprise, admiration, and something that looked almost like shame. "Helena," he replied with a hesitant voice, "you look well, very well." The comment carried a dense emotional weight. It was not just an observation about her appearance, but an implicit recognition of the complete transformation she had brought about in her life. "What can I do for you?" Helena asked, maintaining a professional tone that hid the internal whirlwind of conflicting emotions. "I came to thank you in person for the drawings, and also, if possible, I would like to meet them." The request hit Helena like a punch to the stomach. It was one thing to exchange polite messages from a distance, another entirely to open the door to a real relationship between her daughters and the man who had rejected them before they were even born. "That's not something I can decide in 5 minutes," she replied, after a moment of reflection. "It involves the emotional lives of 2 children who grew up without your presence." "I know," he nodded quickly. "I'm not asking for a decision now, just a chance to explain, to show that I've changed." Helena studied him carefully. The eyes that once showed only coldness or disdain now showed genuine vulnerability. The man in front of her seemed to have been broken and put back together. Still recognizable, but fundamentally altered. "I'm staying in town for 2 weeks," he continued, as Helena remained silent. "This is my contact. When you are ready to talk, I will be available." He held out a simple card, nothing like the elaborate cards with the family crest he had flaunted in the past. Just his name and a phone number. "I need to consult with the girls," Helena replied, accepting the card. "They have the autonomy to decide if they want this contact. If they agree, we will schedule a conversation. First, just between adults, then we'll see about the next steps." The relief on his face was visible. It was not a definitive yes, but it was the opening of a possibility. "Thank you," he said simply. "I didn't even expect to be received." "People change, Ricardo," Helena replied. "I have certainly changed. It would be hypocritical not to consider that you might have changed too." That night was one of intense reflection for Helena. After putting the girls to bed, she stayed for hours on the apartment balcony, watching the lights of the capital. How to tell her daughters that the father they never knew wanted to see them. How to prepare them for a possible meeting without creating unrealistic expectations. How to protect them from potential disappointment without depriving them of the right to know their own history. The next morning, during breakfast before school, she broached the subject delicately. "Girls, something happened yesterday that we need to talk about," she began, watching their reactions carefully. "Your father is in town and has asked to meet you." The silence that followed was dense. Laura, always analytical, frowned. Beatrice left her glass of juice suspended in the air, like a frozen scene. "Is he sick again?" Laura finally asked, revealing how the story of his hospitalization years ago remained the main reference point for their absent father. "No, he's not sick. The important thing is for you to know that the decision to meet him or not is completely yours. There's no right or wrong answer here." "Do you think we should?" Beatrice asked, seeking guidance. Helena took a deep breath. It would be so easy to influence that decision. All it would take would be a negative insinuation, a revealing facial expression. The girls would follow any subtle hint she offered. But that would be betraying the autonomy she had always sought to develop in them. "I think you should listen to your hearts and ask all the questions you need to ask to make a decision you're comfortable with," she replied. "And know that whatever you decide, I will be by your side every step of the way." After a full day of emotional processing, the twins reached a decision that revealed surprising wisdom. "We want to meet him," Laura announced. "But first, you two should talk alone, to sort out the adult stuff. And then we want to meet him in a neutral place, not in our house." The articulation of the demand for neutral territory impressed Helena. The girls intuited the importance of emotional boundaries in this delicate reunion. The preliminary meeting between the adults took place in a discreet cafe. Ricardo was already waiting for her, visibly nervous, with a thick envelope he repeatedly handled. "Thank you for coming," he said when he saw her, "and for considering all of this." Helena nodded. "The girls have decided they want to meet you, but first we need to establish some clear parameters." The conversation that followed was an exercise in personal diplomacy. Helena, who negotiated daily with ministers and businessmen, now found herself in a much more intimate negotiation, establishing the foundation for a possible relationship between her daughters and the man who had once rejected them. "I need to know your real intentions," she said. "Is this a passing interest or something you intend to sustain over time? Because if you're just going to show up in their lives to disappear again, I'd rather we not even start." "I lost everything, Helena," he replied, looking at her directly in the eyes. "My family's empire, the respect of the market. But the worst loss was realizing the terrible man I had become. Someone capable of abandoning his own family with words that don't even deserve to be remembered." He paused. "I don't expect forgiveness or a central role in their lives. Just the chance to get to know them, to offer what I can, to maybe one day deserve to be called their father." The sincerity touched Helena more deeply than she wanted to admit. "What about practical matters?" she asked, transitioning to concrete aspects. "Where are you living now? How do you make a living?" "I sold the last apartment in the city and bought a simple house in a small town," he explained. "I teach gemology at a local technical school. Life is modest, but stable." As he spoke, he opened the envelope, revealing documents that supported his claims. The voluntary transparency impressed Helena. "I also brought this," he continued, taking 2 small velvet boxes from the envelope. "They're for them, but I wanted to show you first." Inside each box was a small silver pendant in the shape of a stylized tree. The trunks formed the initials of each girl, L and B, with small colored crystals embedded as fruits in the branches. "I made them myself in the school workshops," he explained, with a touch of humble pride. "They are my first truly personal creation." "The girls will like them," Helena replied. "It's an appropriate gift, personal without being excessive, beautiful without being ostentatious." The conversation continued for almost 2 hours. Helena set clear boundaries. The first meetings would be supervised and in public places. There would be no promises until he demonstrated a real commitment. Any sign of instability would immediately end the process. "There's one more thing I need to say," Helena said, as the conversation was coming to an end. "I don't hold any resentment against you. The life I built from that rejection brought me more than I ever would have had if we had stayed together. I'm not saying this to minimize the seriousness of what you did," she continued, "but so that you understand that there is no room for paralyzing guilt in this new possibility. If you're going to be in the girls' lives, you need to look forward." "I understand," he replied. "I didn't come looking for easy redemption, but for real responsibility." The Saturday of the meeting dawned sunny. The twins paid special attention to their choice of clothes, not out of vanity, but because of the symbolic weight they attached to that first meeting. At the park, Ricardo was already waiting for them. As he saw the 3 of them approaching, his expression shifted between anxiety, emotion, and a particular kind of fear. The initial introductions were marked by formality. It was Beatrice who broke the ice. "Mom says you made our pendants. They're very pretty." The question opened the door to a conversation about crafts. Soon, they were sitting on a bench with the girls curious about the jewelry-making process. "Can I show you?" he asked, taking a small toolbox from his backpack. "I brought a few things in case you were interested." The next few hours passed in an impromptu workshop, with Ricardo showing them basic techniques. The girls created small pieces, Helena watching from a distance. In the following months, a gradual routine of contact was established. Ricardo visited the city regularly, spending weekends with the girls. The activities evolved from supervised meetings to more natural moments. A trip to the movies, a cooking class, an afternoon helping with school projects. During their vacation, the girls visited Ricardo in his new town, getting to know the technical school where he taught and the simple house where he lived. To Helena's surprise, they returned not only satisfied with the experience, but with a deeper understanding of their own story. "It's strange to see where he lives now," Laura commented. "It looks like Grandma Cecilia's house, not the place you described where you used to live." The observation revealed how the narrative Helena had shared was now being complemented by the girl's direct experience. The story was becoming three-dimensional, with nuances that only personal contact could reveal. "People change," Helena replied, echoing what she had said to Ricardo months earlier. "Sometimes we need to lose everything to discover what really matters." "Like diamonds," Beatrice concluded, remembering a lesson from Ricardo about precious stones. They need pressure and time to form. The metaphor, coming spontaneously from the girl, perfectly captured the process of transformation that they were all experiencing. An existential alchemy, where pressure and time converted painful experiences into something of lasting value. What do you think of the girl's wisdom in navigating this complicated situation? Do you believe Ricardo's change is genuine? Chapter 5. A New Constellation. 4 years had passed since Ricardo reappeared in the lives of Helena and the twins. Years of cautious rebuilding, of small discoveries, of boundaries tested and respected. A delicate balance had been achieved, not the conventional family Helena had once imagined, but a peculiar and functional arrangement where each person had found their place. Relationships, like precious stones, have their own properties. Some are like diamonds, forged under extreme pressure, resistant to scratches. Others resemble opals, delicate, mutable, revealing different colors depending on the angle of the light. The relationship between Helena and Ricardo had transformed into something similar to amber, an ancient resin that preserves fragments of a story that can no longer be altered, but acquires its own beauty in its transparency. The twins, now 14, flourished in the complex tapestry of relationships that formed their emotional universe. Beatrice, the artist of the pair, had developed a notable talent for jewelry design, inspired by both her father's technical teachings and her mother's aesthetic sense. Laura, the scientist, surprised everyone by developing a passion for mineralogy and geology, fascinated not by the external beauty of stones, but by the crystalline structures that composed them. In the professional arena, Helena faced new challenges. After 6 years as a secretary, she had been invited to coordinate an international program under the umbrella of the United Nations, an initiative to replicate the Brazilian model of community development based on traditional knowledge in other countries. The invitation was a dilemma. It would mean frequent travel, periods in other continents, a new family dynamic, just as the twins were entering adolescence. On the other hand, it represented the opportunity to exponentially amplify the impact of her work, influencing global public policy. "What do you girls think about this?" she asked her daughters during a family dinner, after explaining the proposal in detail. As she had always done with important decisions, she included them in the process, not just informing them, but truly consulting them. "You would work with communities like the ones we visited last year?" Laura asked, referring to a trip they had taken together to an indigenous village in the Amazon. "Yes, with similar communities in different countries in Africa, Asia, and all over Latin America," Helena confirmed. "Then you should accept," Beatrice said with conviction. "You look different when you're with those women, more alive, more yourself." The observation, in its adolescent simplicity, captured something Helena didn't always admit to herself, that this job, more than a career, was a fundamental part of her identity. "You're right," Laura agreed, always more pragmatic. "Besides, we're in the digital age. We can talk on video calls every day, and maybe we can visit some of these places on vacation." The last comment revealed how the girls had inherited Helena's adventurous spirit, the ability to see changes as opportunities, not as threats. "We still need to discuss the logistics," Helena interjected. Who would stay with you during my longer trips? How would we manage the school routine? Have you thought about talking to Dad? Beatrice suggested naturally. The suggestion surprised Helena. In all the scenarios she had mentally contemplated, she hadn't considered Ricardo as a possible support for her new professional phase. The idea that the man who had once abandoned her while she was pregnant could now be part of the support network that would allow her to rise to international prominence seemed like an irony of fate too great to be conceived. I think it would be good for everyone, Laura continued, sensing her mother's hesitation. He has said several times that he would like to spend more time with us, and it would be a chance to see if we can really trust him with important things. The last observation impressed Helena deeply. She saw in it the precocious wisdom of someone who understands that trust is not declared, but is tested in concrete situations. I can talk to him about it, she finally agreed. The conversation with Ricardo was surprisingly productive. The gemology teacher who had emerged from the ashes of the failed businessman proved to be not only receptive, but genuinely enthusiastic about the possibility of taking on more responsibility in his daughter's lives. I can adjust my schedule at the technical school to be with them during your longer trips, he offered. And for shorter periods, if you agree, I can move to an apartment in the capital to keep their routine intact. The solution, so simple and functional, seemed almost absurdly normal for a story that had begun with so much drama and rupture. Are you sure this wouldn't compromise your work? Helena asked, still cautious. The ironic question here would be, why do you care about my work now? He replied, with a slight smile that indicated self-irony, not accusation. But the sincere answer is, my priority is the girls. It always should have been. If I can make up for some of the lost time by being useful now, that's not a sacrifice, it's a privilege. The plan was implemented gradually. Helena accepted the international position, but negotiated a 6-month transition. Ricardo rented a small apartment near the girls' school, testing the new dynamic in short periods before taking on greater responsibilities. To the surprise of many, particularly Helena herself, the arrangement worked admirably well. Ricardo proved to be a responsible and attentive father, capable of balancing necessary boundaries with appropriate freedoms. The twins, far from feeling abandoned by their mother's travels, flourished with the new arrangement. He cooks better than you do, Beatrice confided to her mother during a video call when Helena was in her first month in Africa. But he hasn't learned to make that special carrot cake yet, and he's teaching us advanced gem cutting, and he recently mastered some impressive techniques, Laura added. The updates filled Helena with gratitude for the life she had managed to build for her daughters, not in spite of the initial adverse circumstances, but in some ways, through them. It was during one of those routine video calls that an unexpected piece of news came up in the conversation. We have a surprise to tell you, Laura announced, exchanging conspiratorial glances with her sister. We decided to enter an international sustainable jewelry design contest. And that's not all, Beatrice continued, barely containing her excitement. We're doing it together. I'm doing the design. Laura is calculating the structures and the sustainability of the materials. The collaboration between the sisters, so different in their interests and abilities, moved Helena deeply. And we chose a special theme, Laura explained. We're creating a collection called Divergent Paths, pieces that can be worn separately or combined in different ways. It's inspired by you and Dad, Beatrice completed, by how people can separate and then find new ways of connecting without having to go back to being what they were before. And the metaphor, so sophisticated for 14-year-olds, revealed a profound understanding of their family history. It wasn't a naive story of a happy ending with a romantic reconciliation, nor was it a bitter story of villains and victims. It was a mature recognition of how relationships can evolve, transform, and find new meanings even after painful ruptures. Dad is helping us with the technical execution, Laura added, but the concept is all ours. It's absolutely beautiful, Helena replied, not hiding the emotion in her voice. I can't wait to see it. The weeks on the African continent were intense and transformative. Helena worked with communities of artisans in different countries, sharing the methodology developed in Brazil, and, more importantly, learning from local traditions. The model you created in Brazil is revolutionary, not because of the technique, but because of the philosophy, a community leader in Kenya commented. The idea that the communities themselves decide what they want to share and how, that they don't have to choose between tradition and innovation. In every community she visited, Helena shared not only technical strategies, but also her own story of transformation. Without glamorizing the suffering or romanticizing overcoming it, she offered her journey as an example of how adverse circumstances can become catalysts for profound changes. When I was rejected and abandoned, I thought it was the end of my story, she would say in conversation circles with local women. But it was just the difficult beginning of a different journey, one that allowed me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed. Meanwhile, back in the city, the twins were making progress on their project for the international contest. With Ricardo's technical support and Helena's remote guidance, they developed a collection that impressed the preliminary judges, earning them a place among the finalists. We've been selected for the final presentation in Paris, Beatrice announced in a video call. They're paying for our trip and everything. The coincidence of the dates seemed like a final test for the new family structure they had established. The final is precisely during the week you would be in Southeast Asia. Dad said he could go with us if you approve. The sensitivity of the proposal showed how much Ricardo had evolved in his understanding of family dynamics. I think it would be wonderful if your father accompanied you, Helena replied. You worked together on this project. It makes perfect sense for him to be present for this important moment. The decision represented a significant milestone in her personal journey. It wasn't just about family logistics, but about the ability to recognize and celebrate authentic transformations. The day of the competition arrived, and Helena followed along from a distance. The twins presented their collection with the confidence of those who deeply understand not only the artistic value, but the existential meaning of their creation. Divergent Paths is not just about jewelry that can be worn separately or together, Beatrice explained to the judges. It's about how relationships can evolve and find new configurations after separations. Each piece carries its own integrity, Laura added, but when brought together, they create more complex and beautiful patterns precisely because they had the chance to develop independently. The metaphor captured the judge's imagination. When the announcement was made, awarding the collection the main prize in the youth category and a special mention for conceptual innovation, Helena cried silently in front of her computer screen. They weren't tears of sadness for being absent, nor of simple joy for the recognition. They were tears of profound gratitude for the full circle that life had drawn, from cruel rejection to the creation of a story turned into award-winning art. When the twins returned from Paris, they also brought an unexpected proposal. A prestigious design school in Milan offered them full scholarships for when they finished high school. But an even greater challenge was yet to come. Helena received an invitation to lead a global UN program based in Geneva for 2 years. The position would require a complete change of life. She gathered everyone for a frank conversation. The twins, Ricardo, even Aunt Cecilia, who was visiting the capital that week. She presented the proposal with all its possible implications, without advocating for a specific solution. There are many possible paths from here, she explained. I can accept, and we can all go to Geneva. I can accept, and you can stay here with your father. Or I can refuse, and we can continue as we are. Each option has its advantages and disadvantages. You know what impresses me the most? Cecilia commented. How this conversation perfectly symbolizes the journey you all have taken, from the cruel letter left on a table without a chance for dialogue, to this room where everyone has a voice to contribute to a shared decision. The observation put into perspective not only the present moment, but the entire trajectory they had traveled, from unilateral and destructive communication to the collaborative construction of possibilities. It's true, Helena agreed. Regardless of what we decide, the very process of deciding together already represents a victory over the past. And maybe that's the true jewel we've created, Beatrice added. Not the pieces that won the contest, but this family constellation we invented our own way. The phrase family constellation perfectly captured what they had built. Not a rigid, conventional structure, but a flexible arrangement of luminous points, connected by invisible lines of mutual respect and genuine affection. At the end of that week of deliberations, they reached a solution. The twins would spend a year in Geneva with Helena, attending an international school. Then they would decide if they wanted to stay or return to Brazil. Ricardo would reorganize his professional life to spend regular periods in Switzerland. It's like our jewelry collection, Laura observed. Parts that work independently, but can also create new configurations together. On her last day in Brazil before the move, Helena visited the old mansion, where she had briefly lived as a trophy wife. The house had been sold years earlier, when the jewelry empire had collapsed. Only the main gate remained recognizable. Standing before that gate, Helena didn't feel any of the emotions she had imagined. Neither resentment, nor vengeful satisfaction, nor nostalgia. What she experienced was something more surprising. Gratitude. Gratitude for the scared young woman she had been, carrying a single small suitcase and an uncertain future in her womb. Gratitude for the pain, which, like a relentless chisel, had carved aspects of her character that might have remained dormant in more comfortable circumstances. Gratitude for the path that had led her not just to survive, but to flourish. In that moment, she fully understood something she had always known intuitively. Each of us is, ultimately, the artisan of our own story. We don't control all circumstances. We don't choose all the materials available, but we have the power to decide what to do with what life presents us, from the rejected saleswoman to the international expert, from the desperate single mother to the leader of an unconventional family. Helena had transformed every obstacle into an opportunity, every wound into wisdom, every rejection into a self-redefinition. And as she walked away from the mansion, walking toward the future she had built with her own hands, once considered too rough to belong in that world, Helena smiled as she realized the sweetest irony of her journey. The same hands rejected for not being refined had become capable of shaping not only valuable jewelry, but a life of authentic meaning. A life that, like the best artisanal creations, carried the marks of its manufacturing process not as defects to be hidden, but as a unique signature of its authenticity. What an incredible journey of resilience and transformation. What does Helena's story teach you about finding success and happiness after adversity? Epilogue. The new beginning. A year later, the sound of laughter echoed through the backyard of their new home, mixing with the splash of water in the pool and the excited shouts of the children. It was a typical Saturday for the Foster family. Chaotic, noisy, and perfect. Lucia watched from the porch, gently rocking Peter in her arms, while his twin sister, Helena, slept in the stroller beside him. At 1 year and 3 months, the babies were the joy of the house. Peter had his father's intense dark eyes, and Helena's golden curls were starting to appear, a maternal inheritance. "Mom!" Caleb yelled from the pool, now 7 years old and even more like Robert. "Dad said he's going to teach us how to change the oil in the car after lunch. Only if you finish your homework first," she replied, smiling. Lucas emerged from the water, always the most responsible. "I already finished mine, and I helped Livia with math." To Livia, who had discovered a passion for books that rivaled her love for drawing, waved from the lounge chair, where she was reading a graphic novel. "I finished too, and I drew a new family picture for the teacher." "How many people this time?" Lucia asked, remembering Laura's prophecy. "8, the girl replied, proud, counting Grandma Carmen and Grandpa Miguel. Miguel, Robert's father, had reappeared in his son's life after the birth of the twins. The 65-year-old man, who had withdrawn after his wife's death, found a new purpose in the noisy, numerous family. He visited every week, always with gifts and stories to tell. Lara, the 6-year-old philosopher, was sitting on the edge of the pool, swinging her feet in the water, observing everything with that characteristic, thoughtful look. "What are you thinking about, Princess?" Robert asked, coming out of the kitchen with a tray of lemonade. "I was remembering when we weren't a complete family," she said, serious. "It seems like a long time ago." "It does," he agreed, sitting beside her. "Do you remember what it was like before?" "A little. I remember Mom was sad sometimes when she thought we weren't looking. And I remember you weren't there." Robert swallowed the lump in his throat. Even after 2 years of marriage, there were still moments when the reality of almost losing all of this hit him like a punch. "And how do you feel now?" Laura smiled with that illuminated way that melted hearts. "Complete. As if all the pieces of the puzzle are in the right place." On the other side of the yard, Carmen appeared carrying a shopping bag. "Grandma's here!" the children shouted in unison, running to greet her. Carmen, now officially a grandmother of 6, had moved to a smaller house in the same neighborhood. At 65, she was more active than ever, helping with the babies and spoiling the older ones, with the experience of someone who had raised Lucia almost alone. "I brought ingredients for the chocolate cake you asked for," she announced, immediately surrounded by the children. "And I'm going to help make it," Livia said, always eager to learn new things. "Me too," Caleb insisted. "You're just going to make a mess of my kitchen," Carmen laughed. "But come on, let's make the biggest mess this house has ever seen." As the children ran inside with Carmen, Lucia and Robert were left alone on the porch with the babies. Peter had fallen asleep in his mother's lap, and Helena was slowly waking up, making those adorable noises that babies make. "Can you believe it?" Robert asked, sitting next to his wife. "Believe what?" "All of this, our life. 2 years ago, I thought I had lost you forever." Lucia snuggled into her husband's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent that now comforted her instead of bringing back painful memories. "Sometimes it feels like a dream," she admitted, "especially when I look at them and see how happy they are. And you? Are you happy?" The question came in a whisper, as if he still feared the answer. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered sincerely. "Not a naive happiness like before. A conscious happiness, built day by day, with work, with a lot of work. Remember our first fight after we got married?" "About the dishes," he laughed. "You said I was trying to buy your forgiveness by washing all the dishes, and you said I was nitpicking because I couldn't accept that you had really changed. And we were both right. That's why it worked, because we stopped trying to be right and started trying to be together." Helena started to fuss, and Robert reached out to pick her up. "Come here, Princess. Daddy's here." Watching her husband with their daughter in his arms, Lucia had one of those moments of deep gratitude that sometimes surprised her. Life had taught her that mature love was different from young love. Less fiery, perhaps, but much more solid. Built on honesty, genuine forgiveness, and the daily choice to be dedicated to one another. Robert, thank you. For what this time? For fighting for us. For not giving up when I made everything difficult. For becoming the man I needed you to be. He leaned in to kiss her. A soft kiss that carried years of history, forgiveness, and fulfilled promises. And thank you, he whispered against her lips, for giving me a second chance. For raising these amazing people alone. For becoming this extraordinary woman. Mom! Dad! Lucas's voice interrupted them. Grandma Carmen says you have to come see something. They went into the house to find an organized chaos in the kitchen. Carmen was coordinating Operation Cake like an experienced chef. While Caleb mixed ingredients with scientific concentration, Livia decorated cupcakes with artistic precision, and Lara licked the batter spoon with the seriousness of someone performing a task. Look what we made, Livia said, showing them a cupcake decorated with blue and yellow frosting. They're our family colors. Family colors? Lucia asked, intrigued. Yeah, Caleb explained. Blue for Dad's, Lucas's, and my eyes. Yellow for your hair, Livia's, and Laura's. What about the babies? Robert asked. Oh, they're the mix of everything, Laura said philosophically. Peter has the blue eyes, but he's going to have brown hair. Helena's going to have yellow hair, but blue eyes too. They're proof that we're a real family. Lucas completed. All different, but alike in what matters. Carmen wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes shining with emotion. You know what makes me happiest in all of this? She said. Seeing that you two didn't just find each other again, you became better people together. What do you mean, Grandma? Livia asked. Your mom has always been strong, but now she's learned to accept help. And your dad has always been determined, but now he's learned to be patient. Together, they are more complete. That night, after putting all the children to bed, a process that now involved 6 beds, 3 different stories, and at least 4 cups of water, Lucia and Robert met again on the porch. The sky was starry, and the silence of the neighborhood wrapped around them like a hug. What are you thinking about? He asked. How funny life is. 5 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be here, married to you, with 6 children, I would have thought it was impossible. And now? Now I can't imagine it being any other way. Robert pulled her closer, and she snuggled into his lap, as she had learned to do again. Lucia, I love you. Not just what you were or what you became. I love what we became together. I love it too, she whispered. I love our mess, our chaos, our 6 impossible children, our life that never stops. And would you love something else? He asked with a playful tone she knew well. Robert Foster, she said, pulling away to look him in the eyes. Don't tell me you're thinking about more children. I'm just asking hypothetically. 6 children. Robert, 6. But Lara said that when people really love each other, someone else always comes along. Lara is 6 years old. He laughed, kissing the top of her head. Okay. 6 is perfect. It is perfect, she agreed. And it was. In the house, the children slept peacefully, dreaming of adventures and cupcakes. The babies breathed softly in their cribs. Carmen rested in her small house, happy to see the family she helped raise finally complete. And on the porch, under the stars, 2 hearts that had been lost and found again beat in the same rhythm, planning not for more children, at least not yet, but for more years of happiness built day by day with patience, forgiveness, and unbreakable love. because in the end, they had learned the most important lesson of all. True families are not perfect. They are resilient. They don't avoid storms. They learn to dance in the rain. And when they looked to the future that night, they saw only infinite possibilities of love, laughter, and a happiness that this time they were sure was there to stay. I hope you enjoyed this version. Let me know if you want more.